Arctic and Antarctic, and what could possibly be the state practice of India? What are the future trends? I would like to be as short as possible. Now, Arctic and Antarctic both have, as we know, specific environmental regime, possessing similarities and differences. Both of them are governed by different legal regimes, and both possess unique conditions which definitely pose unique challenges and issues to the concerned states and the international community as a whole. The Arctic Environmental Protection Strategy, that is AEPS, and the ATS, which we all are quite familiar about, govern respectively these two regions. One can say that ATS, that is Antarctic Treaty System, is highly developed, progressive and comprehensive, whereas the same qualitative attributes are missing from the AEPS. The geopolitical issues therefore have been primarily responsible for the creation of these two unique regimes. If you look at the Antarctic environment regime, it addresses most of the commonly adopted environmental law principles. The dispute that used to arise due to states' claim to own portions of the Antarctic was eliminated with the adoption of the Antarctic Treaty. Article 4.1 basically reinforces that. Similarly, Articles 1, 2 and 3, it stipulates the requirement for cooperation among the contracting parties in the governance of the Antarctic continent and ensuring the freedom of scientific investigations and international cooperation in scientific research on the continent. Article 6 of the Protocol on Environmental Protection details the type of cooperation to be provided among the contracting parties. And Article 6 further recognizes the cooperation with parties which may have jurisdictional rights adjacent to the Antarctic Treaty area. This corresponds with the information and consultation in cross-boundary relations and the rights of individuals of international environmental law principles, although the protection and preservation principles are well addressed in the supplementary conventions. Contrary to the Antarctic, the Arctic region, in my view, lacks a comprehensive environmental regime to govern and to protect and preserve the very fragile environment. The only regionally applicable environmental regime is, as we all know, the 1991 AEPS adopted by Canada, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden and US. This strategy has 4 programs, and the Arctic Council, which is there to facilitate cooperation in the protection of the Arctic region. However, if you look at this AEPS, the detailed analysis shows some fundamental weaknesses, namely the lack of international environmental principles which are necessary for the protection of the Arctic region and lack of concrete rules and procedures for implementation of the AEPS. Antarctica has, as we all know, found unprecedented way to deal with sovereignty disputes, rejecting the traditional norms and notions of traditional or territorial jurisdiction, which is not the case in case of AEPS. The Hans Island dispute between Canada and Denmark is an example. My address is going to feature on the 3 main issues. These are military related issues, territorial claim related issues and emerging risks to the environment, and specifically increased navigation through the Northwest Passage. The first one is the military issue. A key provision in the ATS was, and which has contributed to the stability of Antarctic, is Article 1.1, which effectively demilitarized the region by banning all military activities. The article already states that Antarctica shall be used for peaceful purposes only, and there shall be prohibited any measure of a military nature, such as the establishment of military bases and fortifications, the carrying out of military maneuvers, as well as the testing of any type of weapon. It was a conscious decision of the states to keep the Antarctic primarily from military programs and activities, which was not the case with the Arctic. Prior to the AEPS, the Arctic was already militarized in terms of presence of nuclear warships and submarines stationed or active in the region. Russia and the US continue to have nuclear and conventional military forces in the region. efforts have been made nevertheless to denuclearize the area because of the Arctic Ocean's current and danger to ecosystem and food security due to possible contamination, if any leaks occur. While the ATS has prevented militarization of the area, especially those that are nuclearly powered or armed, from entering the ATA. The second issue is the sovereignty claims. The ATS, as we all know, has prohibited no new claim or enlargement of an existing claim to territorial sovereignty in Antarctica shall be asserted while the present treaty is in force. Entering into force of the ATS in the last 6 decades of practice show that the 7 original states which registered territorial claims on parts of Antarctica have not pursued them. Territorial claims are frozen for the life of the treaty, successfully preventing any major territorial disputes from developing. No change in this sovereignty regime is likely to in the foreseeable future. Unlike the ATS, the APS agreement makes special reference to the UNCLOS. The Hans Island, which I just mentioned, between Canada and Denmark falls under this reference and state practice followed by these nations. Thus, the Arctic will continue to see conflicts of territorial claims and disagreements over the distribution of natural resources, which the Antarctic regime has been insulated from due to effective implementation of the Antarctic Treaty. The Antarctic Treaty purpose is, as you know in the Article 2, the parties commit themselves to the comprehensive protection of the Antarctic environment and designate Antarctica as a natural reserve devoted to peace and science. The third is the environmental challenge to the Arctic. One can clearly see that while the Antarctic regime, although being binding and having stringent environmental provisions, and the Arctic regime, although much less strict, face the same problem, namely their abilities to deal with emerging environmental threats. Arctic temperatures have risen, as we know, at almost twice the global average, and I'm pretty sure the presentations before me must have made some remarks on that. But the common commercial navigation would on one hand lead to reduced global carbon dioxide emissions. The increased traffic and risks of spills and shipwrecks might be detrimental to the Arctic's fragile ecosystem. Canada, one of the key players in the Arctic regime, claims that the Northeast Passage is sovereign Canadian territory, a claim based on the fact that the Inuit people have lived around its water for centuries and that Canada should be able to enforce Canadian rules and regulations in the area and refuse entry to any vessels which do not conform to its environmental and construction standards. The Antarctic and Arctic regime have developed along very different paths in response to the different characteristics of each region. The Antarctic has been demilitarized through the creation of a groundbreaking agreement leading to the development of the ATS. The Arctic, dominated by the national laws of the 8 Arctic states, has seen an ongoing military presence which includes aging nuclear vessels that pose significant environmental threat if not dismantled properly. Now, in backdrop of this, what could be the future trends as far as countries like India is concerned, which has gained the observer status? But if you look back as India's association with Arctic, it goes back to the 1920 when India was not yet independent, and it was part of the British Dominion, which signed the Treaty of Svalbard Treaty in February 1920. But recently we can go back to the Indian Arctic program, which was started in 2007, and of course our Himadri base. India, as you all know, is an observer member of the Council. Now there are certain issues which I believe that there might be not correct perceptions in the minds of ordinary people. But one of the most important is the global commons and the Arctic. But in my personal view, global commons is a doubtful proposition, because while accepting the observer status, India and other countries had recognized criteria of sovereign rights of Arctic states, law of the sea as a governing treaty, respect indigenous people, and to contribute to the work of the Council. None of the sovereign members of the Council can be expected to give up their rights, but norms of cooperation are certainly possible. India would definitely gain from participation in the activities of the Council and also scientific expedition, but any proactive role as far as monitoring of the Arctic and climate change and its consequent impact on the governance of the climate change regime and cost and benefits for the developing countries such as India and China are concerned, at least currently looks, in my view, over ambitious, if not fully misplaced. There have been suggestions to establish an Arctic Commission under the UN umbrella, but I personally believe using any such metaphor like the Indian Ocean Commission or the like are not realistic. The maximum an observer can do is to keep bringing impact of melting Arctic ice and global climate change discussions within the boundaries which a sovereign nation recognizes and accepts, while becoming an observer or a member of any such forum. As a champion of nuclear disarmament, India perhaps can push for nuclear-free Arctic and can even pitch for demilitarization as a solid option for peaceful use of the Arctic. However, as India and Russia intend to cooperate in military and energy affairs vis-à-vis Arctic, one has to watch what is in the store. Indian observer status and experience it will gain will definitely help her to engage commercially with other Arctic members. For example, to give effect to the joint agreement between India and Russia of 2016, in which Russia expressed its interest in attracting Indian companies to participate in joint projects on the development of the Arctic itself. India can proactively look for possible cooperation benefits vis-à-vis climate change, biodiversity measures, and most importantly, shipping and energy prospecting. As the role of observer is limited, India can try to get maximum benefits from the participation in the 6 working groups which are there. India, to achieve a twin goal of energy security and climate change, can actively pursue partnership with Russia but also Canada in Arctic. As far as commercial opportunities are concerned, I believe these are at really nascent stage as far as India is concerned. Climate change, as we all know, attaining the proportion of national security, and speaking from this position, it may be of interest to India to take all initiatives possible, so some ambitious concerns in the Arctic as well. India can definitely take initiatives and participate actively in the scientific expeditions and new economic initiatives such as flammable ice, new energy resources, ecology, water and environmental protection, climate change, all are important for the 21st century. There are certain interesting initiatives taken by observers which may interest India. For example, China has expanded its ambitious Silk Road Trade, that is OBOR project, shortening the 1/3 mileage between China and Europe to include Arctic Sea, linking its economy to Europe and obviously underlining the economic and strategic importance for its rising position. Arctic Sea is one of the 3 ocean-based blue economic passage for China along with the Indian and Pacific Ocean passages. In July, Chinese shipping giant COSCO announced plans to send more cargo vessels to the Arctic, where they will be guided by the first Northwest Passage Chinese language guidebook published by Northwest Passage Safety Administration in April. Also in July, the polar research vessel Xulong conducted its 7th Arctic expedition, and the country approved tender for the first domestically produced icebreaker. China has already sounded alarm that the negotiated settlement between Canada and the US in their sovereignty disputes regarding the waterway in Arctic would be unfair to China and other regional outsiders. Despite the region's potential, headwinds persist. After the first big freighter traversed the Northeast Passage in 2014, the Polar Research Institute of China predicted up to 15% of the country's annual trade would travel along Russia's North Sea route by 2020. What India could learn? Do not take any position as far as sovereign disputes between US and Canada over the Northeast Passage is concerned. Although the growing relations between India and US insistence for these waters to be considered as international waters and possible reticence of India in endorsing the same has to be kept in mind. Although neither US nor Canada is looking for any position of India on the matter, it is useful to keep cards open for India. Keep pushing for more and more multilateral talks and application of UNCLOS in full manner. India should opt for maintaining stability and freedom of navigation in accordance with UNCLOS. As India gains strength, it can look for supporting efforts of Arctic nations to improve marine transport conditions, carry out surveys on potential resources and clean energy. Unlike China, Its geographical position gives less benefits to take part in the commercial shipping through the Arctic route. India may consider developing its Arctic policy based on collection and analysis of adequate data. Along with other diplomacy, scientific diplomacy both for Arctic and Antarctic should actively feature, as these hold great commercial, scientific and strategic benefit to the nation. China will undoubtedly and has already started for challenging the status quo, which peaceful and international law bound India will not show any signs of expansions or revisionist postures like China. India should initiate high quality scientific publications covering the areas of ocean, climate, sea, ocean and anthropology. Also important are biodiversity and ecosystems, geodynamics and natural resources. More laboratories can be included to undertake research in climate, atmosphere and ecosystem. NCAOR can provide a legal framework and the human, logistic and technical financial resources for the development of Indian polar research. India can develop a dedicated Arctic initiative to provide and unite existing scattered efforts and to improve the understanding and visibility of Indian community internationally. Lastly, the objective of sustainable development promoted by the Arctic Council, whose guiding principles are set out in international law, raises definitional issues. Those are indicators, social representation and legal systems, and implementation of in the specific context of Arctic. The increasing complexity of stakeholder interactions in this heterogeneous region where legislation is fragmented, thus make the governance of sustainable development a major research issue in the Arctic region, where India can take number of research projects to assess the impact of economic activities in different sectors on the environment and on societies, and globally also on shipping routes, possible extension of fishing activities to the high seas along the lines what French policy has developed in 2015. It can include social, environmental, legal, political and health components, and research then can contribute to the quality of life index and the analysis of governance mechanisms defined as the process of cooperation and accommodation by which individuals and Indian institutions, public and private, manage their common affairs to produce results in terms of strategic options, and that can be presented to the Indian policymakers. Thank you.